Have you ever used an online translator and just been floored by how good it is? How it seems to just get the nuance of a sentence? Well, that massive leap in quality, it happened almost overnight. And the story behind it is really the story of how we taught an AI a very human skill, how to pay attention. So think about this. Back in 2014, neural machine translation, or NMT, was just this niche research idea. But then something absolutely incredible happened. Just 2 years later, Google switched its entire translation service over to NMT, and the jump in quality was just stunning. By 2018, it was the standard everywhere. This wasn't some slow, gradual improvement. No, this was a revolution. So what on earth changed? The technology behind this earthquake was called neural machine translation, and it wasn't just a small update, it was a complete and total rethinking of the entire problem. It basically threw out all the old, clunky, rule-based systems and replaced them with a much more elegant, kind of brain-inspired approach. And just to give you a sense of how huge this disruption was, consider this. On one side, you had decades of work from these massive teams building super complicated translation machines. And on the other, you had these new models built by just a handful of people in a few months that completely blew the old ones out of the water. It was a total paradigm shift. But here's the catch. This revolutionary new approach had a critical, almost fatal flaw baked right into its initial design. It's a problem that computer scientists call the information bottleneck. So this was the first design. It's called a sequence-to-sequence model. You can see it has two parts, an encoder on the left that reads the input sentence, and a decoder on the right that writes out the translation. Seems logical, right? But the problem, the critical flaw, was hiding in that single arrow connecting the two. Yep, that one single connection was the whole problem. The encoder had to read an entire sentence, no matter how long or complicated, and then compress every single ounce of its meaning into one fixed-size chunk of data. It's like trying to summarize the entire novel War and Peace in a single short sentence. You're just going to lose a lot of important detail. This right here, this was the bottleneck in action. Every bit of meaning, every nuance, every relationship between words had to be forced through that one narrow channel. And yeah, it worked okay for short sentences, but for longer ones, the model would essentially start forgetting the beginning of the sentence before it could even finish the translation. The solution, when it came, was one of those beautiful, simple ideas that seems so obvious in hindsight. Instead of trying to force the AI to have a perfect superhuman memory, what if we just taught it to look back at the source text? Just like a human would. Here's the core difference, right? The old machine approach tried to remember everything all at once, which, as we saw, led to information getting lost. But that's not how we work. A human translator constantly glances back at the original text, focusing on the most relevant parts for the word they're translating right now. Their attention shifts. The breakthrough was giving the AI that exact same ability to shift its focus. This new technique was, pretty fittingly, called attention. It gave the decoder the ability to selectively look at different parts of the original sentence at each step of the translation. So let's break down how it actually works. Okay, so from a high level, it's a 4-step process. First, the part of the model that's writing the translation asks, what information do I need right now? That's the query. Then it scores every single word in the original sentence based on how relevant it is to that question. Next, it turns those scores into a clear map of what to focus on. And finally, it creates a custom summary of the original text based on that focus map. So it all starts with a query. As the decoder is about to write the next word, it generates this query, which is really just the model asking itself a question. For example, if it just wrote the word I, its query might be asking, okay, what action did I perform in the original sentence? That query is then compared against every single word in the original sentence, and this generates an attention score for each one. A high score signals that a word is highly relevant to the question being asked, while a low score means it's not really important for this particular step. But, a raw list of scores isn't super helpful. So the model runs them through a function that cleans them up and turns them into probabilities. You can think of it like a heat map that gets laid over the original sentence, highlighting the exact words the model needs to pay the most attention to for this specific step. And finally, the model creates its attention output. Instead of that old compressed bottleneck, it builds a brand new, custom summary of the original text. It does this by creating a blend of the input words, but it gives much more importance, more weight.
to the ones with those high attention scores. The result is a perfect, selective summary, tailor-made for what the decoder needs in that exact moment.
Now, this whole mechanism didn't just solve the bottleneck problem, it completely changed the entire field of AI. It turned out that this idea of attention was a fundamental concept that could be applied almost everywhere. This more general definition really shows the true power of the idea. If you take away the context of translation or sentences, what you're left with is a universal tool. It's a mechanism for letting a model focus on the most relevant parts of any data, text, images, sound, whatever, all based on a specific query. It's become a fundamental building block for modern AI.
But maybe the most amazing discovery was a totally unintended side effect. Just by learning where to pay attention, the model had accidentally taught itself how to align words between languages. It figured out completely on its own which English words corresponded to which French words. Nobody programmed it to do this. It was this complex skill that just emerged from the system. And that was a sign of just how powerful this idea really was.
The attention mechanism gave models the power to look at an input and decide what was important. It was a massive breakthrough, but it immediately led to an even more profound question. What happens if you take this powerful focus mechanism and turn it inward? What if a sentence could pay attention to itself? Well, that's a story for another time.